My name is Varan. I grew up in the heart of a land that seemed carved by war, among mountains as sharp as knife blades, in the Cedar region, on the Iraqi-Turkish border. I learned from a young age that life there was more about resistance than about living. My mother always said that the land never forgot. It kept every tear, every scream, and every bullet fired. For me, war was something natural, like winter arriving with the first breath of wind or flowers that bloom and die before you know it. Everything had its cycle, even destruction. At 15, I already knew how to disassemble and clean a rifle without even opening my eyes. Adolescence there doesn't have the same flavor as a book. Growing up is just the time it takes for the next military convoy to show up, and each day is a battle for survival. That's how I got into arms smuggling, a lifeline for an extremist group that believed freedom came with the sound of a gunshot. The only thing I learned was how to make heavy chains, heavier than the chains of our enemies. My friends and I, young like me, traded our lives for a cause that seemed to repeat itself endlessly, an idea that no longer knew what it meant, but that consumed us all the same. My best friend's name was Saran. Together we shared a loaf of stale bread and braved the cold of endless mornings in a trench we dug on the side of a nameless hill. Life was about that. Survival. Dreaming of little things. Soren dreamed of buying a herd of goats for his mother. I, on the other hand, wanted to give my mother a compass so she'd never get lost in the mountains while searching for healing herbs. But everything changed in an instant. A sharp, metallic buzz cut through the air. A drone appeared out of nowhere, spraying fire just meters away. The impact shook the ground, shattering the sand and shattering the air. When the sound of the world fell silent, only pain and emptiness remained. Shards of metal pierced my shoulder, and the silence that followed was more deafening than any explosion. When I finally managed to drag myself away, I saw Soren lying in the dust, his chest open, his eyes fixed on something I couldn't see. I approached him, trembling with fear and guilt, and tried to staunch the bleeding with my dirty hands. But he grabbed me by the neck with the last of his strength and, breathless, whispered something I've never forgotten. He found me. Jesus found me. His words made no sense. He was dying, as if he were talking about someone I'd never met. Jesus? I thought. How could he mention that name now? I didn't understand. I wanted him to explain, but as I tried to coax answers from him, he just kept repeating the same phrase, as if it were the last thing that made sense to him, as if it were the key to something beyond me. And then he was gone. He died with those words on his lips, and I stood there, with the question burning inside me. Who was this Jesus? I returned to camp, overcome with rage, unable to sleep or eat. Every thought was a memory of Soren's face, his words echoing in my mind, and that name I didn't understand. When I tried to seek answers from my comrades, I realized that, for them, God was nothing more than a distant, irrelevant idea. They believed in the religion of gunpowder, of destruction. They had no time for someone who healed rather than wounded. Anger consumed me, but at the same time, doubt tormented me. So I decided to risk everything. I crossed to the other side, to Turkey, where I heard about a group of Christians offering humanitarian aid in refugee camps. I knew I wouldn't find what I was looking for there, but something told me to go. I walked for 3 days, crossing minefields, passing patrols. Finally, I reached a white canvas tent with a hand-drawn symbol, something I had never seen before, the silhouette of a fish. What awaited me there would change my life forever. It was in this refugee camp that I met a man named Rafik. He didn't look like a great leader or a preacher. He wore no religious robes or symbols of any kind. He was simply a man with a smile that seemed to withstand the weight of all the winters that had passed. He offered me bread, tended to my injured shoulder, and most importantly, listened, unhurriedly, without interruption, as I told him about Saran's death and everything that had brought me there. When I finished speaking, Rafik took a worn notebook from his backpack and, with the calm of one who has seen much, began to read. He showed me a passage from the Gospel that spoke of Jesus weeping at the tomb of a friend. The words came out slowly and softly, like olive leaves swaying in the night wind. I had never heard anything like it. The idea of a God who wept, who felt the pain of others, was like a blade cutting through the layers of cynicism I carried. Because until then, I believed that gods fed on the pain of others, that power came from destruction. But Jesus, He didn't need martyrs to be great. He was great because he felt, because he wept. Something inside me began to stir. That night, the camp was quiet. The smell of lentil soup mingled with the smoke from the wet wood. I heard the children crying, the snores of those trying to sleep, but inside me, there was something that felt more real than anything I had ever experienced. I felt a voice whispering inside my chest, "Baran, I cried for you too." I shivered, but it wasn't a hallucination. I knew something was happening. The truth was revealing itself in a way I couldn't control. The next morning, I couldn't resist any longer. I asked Rafik to explain more about this Jesus, the man who wept, who raised the dead, who forgave those who crucified him. For weeks, I'd heard stories about a carpenter who touched lepers, who sat with the marginalized, and who even forgave those who would have killed him. With each story, a new stone fell from the wall of hatred and distrust I'd built over the years. Then the moment arrived. I knelt on the hard gravel ground, my hands trembling, but my soul at peace. I declared, in a low but firm voice, "I want to follow this God with pierced hands." There was no fanfare, no bright lights, but there was something inside me that could no longer be put into words. I had freed myself. The weight of my rifle disappeared, though it still slung over my shoulder, like a shadow from the past. I handed Rafik my gun, and with it, left the man I had been until that moment. The extremist group considered me a traitor. They put a price on my head, as we had put on bullets and explosions before. I fled. I fled through unknown valleys, guided by peasants who led me through paths of rocks and thorns. For months, I slept in unfamiliar places, changing my name and using bandages to hide the scars on my face. I was a fugitive, scarred and alone. That's why, today, they call me the faceless martyr. Because I left behind the old Baran, the one who lived for war, for hatred. That man crumbled before the truth, until even my own reflection became unrecognizable. Today, I live among refugees on the border, sharing with them a hope torn from a worn notebook, yellowed pages that spoke of a God who died for his enemies and rose again for his friends. My pulpit is a corner where mothers distribute bread and children play with patched balls. My Bible travels with me, wrapped in a piece of cloth sewn by Saran's grandmother. Every night I read it quietly, by the dim light of a lantern, as the wind rustles the tent's canvas. Sometimes the wind seems to repeat, "Blessed are those who mourn, for one day they will laugh." And always, when I hear the distant drone of drones overhead, my blood runs cold. But then I close my eyes and remember Soren's words. He found me. Jesus found me. In 3 seconds, I realized that living without a face wasn't a tragedy, but a privilege, because now I carry the face of the one who died for his enemies and rose again for his friends. And I know, with a silent conviction, that the earth will still hold the memory of the bullets that fall, but it will also hold the memory of the tears transformed into the seed of a kingdom where there's no room for rifles, where peace reigns without the need for violence. Sometimes I wonder who I would be if that drone hadn't crossed the sky, if Soren were still here, breathing, if I were still fighting for a flag I no longer knew what it meant. But there are silences louder than bombs. There are encounters that make no noise but are more disarming than any explosion. And these encounters are the ones that, in the end, shape true life. It was a random afternoon, in the middle of an improvisation. I was there, surrounded by children, teaching them to read in a workshop made of cardboard boxes and borrowed tables. Suddenly, a boy looked at me with those big eyes and asked, simply, "When did Jesus know how to say?" I laughed inwardly, but I also felt the weight of something profound in those words, something more powerful than any theology I'd read. It was as if that child had grasped something I myself was only just beginning to grasp. I told him that Jesus not only knew when to speak, but that he spoke with the voice of someone who lived among the rubble, with a broken accent, like those who know what it means to survive, not because they chose to, but because they had no other option. And I realized, in that moment, that preaching wasn't just reciting verses or repeating them like a magic formula. Preaching was translating those verses into the language of hunger, fear, loss, the scorched earth within each of us. I became a bridge, not because I planned it, but because pain taught me how to cross. from one side to the other, from violence to forgiveness, from pride to compassion, from a broken identity to a new one that doesn't depend on where I was born, or the blood that runs through my veins. One night, a young woman arrived at the camp. Her face was covered by a gray scarf, and she walked like someone who had carried the weight of centuries. Her eyes were red, but not from crying. She was holding back tears. Her name was Dylan, and she had fled a scouting ring on the border. No one wanted to listen to her. People avoided her. But when I looked at her, I saw in her eyes the abyss I knew well, the one that consumed me after Soren's death. I sat down next to her, offered her hot tea, and began to talk about a God who had also been betrayed, beaten, and abandoned. I read her a passage from the Gospel of John. "The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life, and have it abundantly." Dylan didn't understand everything, but she understood the most important thing, that there is a voice that doesn't want to take anything from her, that doesn't want to use her, but that desires to love her unconditionally, without reservation. And there, something inside me was healed too. Today, Dylan sings with the children at the camp. Her voice still trembles, but not with fear. Each note she sings seems to heal something in the air, as if she was somehow mending pieces of a broken world. One day, soldiers arrived to inspect the camp. They wore new uniforms, but their eyes were old, marked by distrust and the weight of the bullets they had fired. They stared at me for a while, as if searching for something, and then one of them recognized me. "You're Baran, aren't you? The one who fled the battlefront?" I didn't lie. I said yes, that I was that Baran, or rather that I once was. He spat on the ground as if that were the only gesture he knew how to make. "You betrayed the people. You're worse than a deserter." His hatred was visible, but to my surprise, he didn't shoot. I looked at him, not with anger, but with compassion, and somehow, neither did I. Perhaps it was the first time neither of us lived up to the other's expectations. On rainy days, when the mud covers everything and the cold penetrates to the bone, I often write letters. Letters I never send. Letters to my mother, to Soren, to myself. In one of these letters I wrote, "If you ever look for me, don't look for me in old photos. Don't look for me in lists of combatants or in unmarked graves. Look for me among those who forgive, among those who weep with others without wanting to understand everything. Look for me where bread is broken with wounded hands and hope is not buried like a lost thing. I don't know what will become of me tomorrow. Perhaps war will return because the world seems addicted to recycling hatred and destruction. But perhaps those who seek me will find me, not in the face I once had, but in the eyes of those who still believe there is a life to be lived, even in the rubble, even in the pains along the way. I am Baran, but I am also something more than that. And perhaps you will find me where words no longer have the power to change, but where broken hands continue to give, to heal, to offer. They can kill me, but death doesn't scare me, not anymore. The worst thing that ever happened in my life wasn't losing my life itself, nor seeing my village consumed by fire. The real pain was living without knowing there was a love that didn't need my violence to be real. Now I understand that it wasn't me who found something. It was Jesus who found me, amid the dust, the ruins, the guilt, and he demanded nothing of me. He just looked at me, and with that look, he cleared my name. The world goes on as if nothing had changed, but there are corners where the kingdom of God infiltrates, silent, persistent, unstoppable, like water seeping through cracks in the rocks. And I, who was once Baran the smuggler, Baran the faceless, Baran the traitor, today I am simply Baran, a witness to mercy who needs no passport. Because true revolution didn't begin with an army or a flag, but with a piece of wood. His blood demands not revenge, but reconciliation. And here I am, not hoping for heaven, but sowing it wherever I can, with every smile, with every hug, with every cup of tea shared with those the world threw away. Because I too was discarded, until they whispered in my ear, "I cried for you too." I recently met a boy named Jemmy. He couldn't have been more than 7 years old, but his eyes carried a heavy winter, like those of many others I've seen. He was found alone, in a cave 2 kilometers from the camp, hugging the body of his little sister, who was no longer breathing. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He just stood there, as if he didn't understand that death doesn't ask permission, nor does it leave a manual. They brought him wrapped in a blanket, asking me to calm him. But you can't calm someone who's seen too much. What he needs is companionship. That night, we slept together. He curled up in my lap, a little ball of pain, and I prayed silently, wordlessly, just synchronizing my breathing with his pain. At dawn, he asked me for a piece of paper and a pencil. He said he wanted to write a letter to Jesus. In his sloppy handwriting, he wrote, "Jesus, if you find my sister, tell her to wait for me." I broke down. Because there, on that simple piece of paper, I understood that there are letters that don't need a stamp, only faith. The days here are marked by arrivals and departures. Sometimes someone appears, face covered, eyes suspicious, looking for food, and without knowing it, also looking for something more. That's how a certain Aram arrived. A former militiaman like me, but with more tattoos than words. He trusted no one, slept with a knife under his pillow, and eyed everyone with the suspicion of someone who'd been betrayed so many times. But one night, he saw me praying, and it disturbed him more than any sermon. He sarcastically asked me why I was talking to myself. I told him I wasn't talking to myself, that I was talking to someone who never stopped looking for him. He laughed, that bitter laugh that has buried so many. But the next day, he returned. He sat silently, watching, asking no questions, just listening. A week later, he helped me set up a tent for a pregnant woman who had come from Aleppo. He said nothing, but when he finished, he left a message on a stone near the fire. It was something simple, yet loaded with profound meaning. He wrote, "Pain is the only thing everyone has, but the choice of how to live with it is ours." That was all. And I knew in that moment that true transformation doesn't happen in grand speeches, but in the silence of actions. In the way we, day after day, begin to carry the pain of others with a lighter, more open heart. Sometimes, the greatest revolution isn't in what we say, but in what we do, in the small choices we make for others, and for ourselves, with every step. I, Baran, have been many things, but today, I am someone who has learned to live not with the weight of violence, but with the lightness of forgiveness. And perhaps that is true freedom. If Jesus forgives, I want to learn not to hate. That's all. He didn't ask for anything. He didn't sign any promises. But I knew something had changed inside me. A crack had opened, and that's where the light enters. I still felt fear, of course, but more than that, I began to feel compassion. The version of me that lived only for revenge and violence no longer existed. Baran, the one who carried ammunition and hatred, no longer walks among men. And if someone ever comes looking for him, they won't find him. They'll find only someone who washes others' feet instead of pointing guns. Someone who learned to cry with those who suffer and to smile with those who try to rebuild. We recently buried an old man everyone knew as the crazy man on the corner. No one knew his name, only that he told crazy, impossible stories while children clung to his legs. He died silently, in the middle of the night, with a smile so big on his face, it was as if he'd dreamed of heaven. We built him a simple tomb, made of stones and a crooked cross made from 2 pieces of wood. On the stone I wrote, "Here lies one who knew how to listen." And as I wrote those words, I knew I wanted to be remembered this way, not for what I destroyed, but for what I was able to rebuild with the pieces of my faith. Sometimes, on the hardest nights, when the wind blows hard and threatens to tear everything down, I kneel beneath the stars and allow myself to speak to the one who never asked me to be perfect. I'm just honest with him. I tell him that I'm afraid of falling again, that sometimes I miss the false security of the rifle, that there are days when I feel small, useless, but always, always I hear the same voice, calm and constant. You are not the same person. You are mine, and that is enough. And somehow, that's always enough. Once, while distributing blankets near the eastern edge of the camp, I saw a woman sitting beside a pile of broken bricks. She wasn't looking at anyone, her feet covered in dried mud, and her eyes looked like 2 lakes about to overflow. I approached cautiously, without intruding on her space, offered her a piece of bread, and asked her name. "Azin," she said. Just that. Nothing more. Days later, one of the volunteers told me that Azin came from the same village where the drone had crashed, where Soran had died. My world seemed to stop for a second. All the dust from the roads I'd traveled rose to my throat. I returned that afternoon to look for her. I asked if she knew Saran. Her eyes shone silently, but she didn't answer. She simply said, "His mother died of grief. Saran's grave is beneath a pomegranate tree that never bore fruit." I sat beside Azan, and the silence between us lasted so long that it became a silent, shared conversation. Finally, I picked up the Bible wrapped in the cloth Saran's grandmother had sewn and placed it in her hands. She didn't open it. She just held it, and that was enough. There's no rush in certain moments. Some things don't need to be said, just felt. Over time, Azan became part of the team. She began teaching other women how to make herbal soaps, with hands that know pain, but also healing. Sometimes life seems to go around in circles, taking us back to the same old places. But somehow, what seemed lost finds its way to another, and what seemed impossible finds a way to blossom. Today I wonder where my journey will take me, but I know that wherever I go, I've already found enough to sustain me. The weight of violence has lifted, and the love I carry now needs no weapons, no battles. It spreads through small gestures, in Azan's smile, in the stillness of the old man who knew how to listen, in the simplicity of a shared piece of bread. Because in the end, that's what truly matters. She also makes herbal teas to soothe the children's insomnia, but there are days when she doesn't say a word. Days when you just see her staring at the sky, with a look that seems to ask, why him and not me? I understand that question. I've cried it out many times in my heart over the years. And while I've never heard an answer with thunder or lightning, I've learned, over time, that there are answers that don't come in words. There are wounds that heal not with explanations, but with presence. And if God saved me, it wasn't to give me all the answers, but to keep me company. One night, while the camp slept, gunshots were heard not far away. Mothers woke suddenly, covering their children with their own bodies. Some men, impulsive, wanted to come out with sticks and stones, but I told them to wait. I lit the lamp, grabbed the book that always accompanies me, and walked up the hill. My heart was pounding like a war drum, but fear no longer held the same power over me. When I got there, I found 2 wounded soldiers, deserters. One was barely breathing, the other trembling, pointing his rusty gun at me. "Who are you? What do you want?" he asked hoarsely. I found the truth within myself and said, "I am Baran. I have not come to shoot. I have come to heal." He laughed, coughed up blood, and with teary eyes lowered the gun. He wept, and through his tears said, "I'm also tired of killing for nothing." We returned to camp together, carrying the other soldier between us. They didn't applaud us. There was no gratitude. Some glared at me, but I didn't care. I didn't come to please. I came to redeem. The 2 soldiers stayed, and one of them died that same week. The other is named Dilshad. Today he builds shelters from recycled wood. He doesn't say much, but when he does, it's as if his words carry the weight of the cost of peace. One day, while hammering a beam, he said, "Sometimes I dream about the people I've killed, but ever since I heard that passage where Jesus forgives the thief on the cross, I wake up with fewer screams in my head. And I knew that this alone, was a miracle." That phrase stayed with me, because I understood that true peace is not the absence of pain, but the ability to live with it, without it destroying us. Recently, I found an old photo at the bottom of a forgotten bag. It was a picture of my father. I didn't remember him being so young. In the photo, he had the same expression I had the day I crossed the border, empty and hard. I wanted to know more. I went to the archives of the organization that keeps records of displaced people and found his name among those who died more than 10 years ago in an attack near Sako. He left no letter, no grave, just a word scratched out of an insurgent report. I stared at that paper for hours, wondering how many die with labels that don't tell their story. I wondered if anyone ever cried for him. That night, I knelt, not to pray for myself, but for him, for the man who gave me life, and never knew there was another path than that. And in that moment, I felt that the same Jesus who wept for Lazarus wept for my father, and that changed something in me. It changed the way I viewed loss and absence. Today, many call me brother, others traitor. Some ignore me, but I no longer need to be recognized, because the one who recognized me first was he, the one with the pierced hands, the one who didn't ask me to purify myself, but simply to let him in, and that's who I am now. No longer a soldier, no longer a traitor, I am someone who learned, in the folds of pain, that there is a love that needs no weapons, no justifications. He found me in the ruins, in the tears, and made me see that there is no true freedom without forgiveness. And even in the days of silence and uncertainty, I know He is here, by my side, unhurried, without judgment, simply present. And if I must die tomorrow, may it be sowing the only thing that survives the fire, the love that expects no reward. Once, during a dry and windy dawn, I heard footsteps near the tent. They weren't the footsteps of a child or a mother. They were heavy, as if each footprint carried a decision made amidst bullets. I rose silently. Someone stood, silhouetted against the darkness. He removed his hood and murmured my name, Baran. It was my brother. The same brother I thought was dead years ago. The same one who joined another group, more radical than mine. The same one who swore to avenge our father, consumed by more hatred than the heart could hold without becoming poisoned. We stared at each other for a long time. Neither of us moved. His face was gaunt, but his eyes were still those of the boy who had followed me over the cliffs, behind hawks' nests. "They say you betrayed us," he said softly, "that you are now a dog of the infidels." I swallowed hard, not because the insult hurt, but because I recognized in him the same tremor that had run through me when I had first spoken the name of Jesus aloud. They say many things to answer, but what they don't say is that I'm alive and free. Free from what, Baran? If you're washing feet now instead of carrying weapons. Free from the burden of believing that I need to destroy to exist. Silence returned, and then he did something I hadn't expected. He sat down. He didn't say anything else, just sat, like when we were children, and after a punishment, we didn't know what to say. We didn't speak again that night, but at dawn, I found a piece of paper near the fire. In his neat handwriting, it read, "I don't understand what you are, but for the first time I don't want to kill you. And I learned that sometimes grace comes like dew, without warning, but it changes everything it touches." Weeks passed. Sometimes I write phrases I've gleaned from the gospel on the walls of the tents. One afternoon, an elderly woman approached me. She had read one of these phrases, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do." She asked me with a deep look, "Do you really believe that, son?" I told her, "Yes, I don't always feel this way, but I believe it." Then she said to me, "Then show me, because I still can't forgive whoever killed my granddaughter." I had no answers. I just offered him my hand. "Let's start without hating together," he told her. And so it was. We began walking every morning, sometimes to talk about the weather, other times about her granddaughter, or simply about nothing. One day, out of the blue, she said to me, "Today I prayed for him. Not so he would do badly, but so he would find what I found. Comfort." I said nothing. I just smiled at her because I knew that was preaching too. A foreign reporter once showed up. She wanted to document everything. Interviews, stories, photos. "Can I tell the world about you, Baran?" she asked. I said yes, but that she shouldn't forget to tell the stories that don't have names. The ones that don't fit on camera. The ones told with a look, a piece of bread, a song sung with a choked voice. Because the true story is the one not seen by the eyes but felt by the heart. And it is this story, this small, silent revolution that cuts through pain and hatred that I want to leave behind. A story of a man who found freedom not in turning away from the shadows, but in embracing them, and at the same time, discovering that the light was always there, waiting for him. And maybe that's what I am now. Not a hero, not a martyr, just a man who chose to be a companion, even when the world only knows how to wage war. Because in the end, the love I sowed doesn't need records or cameras. It's the kind of love that grows, even in the trenches, even in the rubble. And maybe it's the only testimony that truly matters. "And what title do you want me to give your story?" she asked. "It's not my story," I said. "It's the story of a God who walks among the ruins without making a sound, but leaving everything distinct." She left crying. I never knew if she published anything, but she left a box of crayons. Children now draw crosses, fish, and weeping suns. And it seems to me that this is also true. One afternoon, a young man came running. He was carrying his wounded mother in his arms. She had climbed into a trap door the soldiers had left for her safety. She screamed in pain. We made way for her. We treated her as best we could. The young man looked at me in despair. "Does God allow this?" I looked at him calmly and said, "No, but God enters into this pain. not to justify it, but to embrace it from within. He didn't fully understand me, but he remained, and now he helps other hurting people. Sometimes I see him talking to his mother in a low voice. He tells her that there is a God who suffers with her, and I know that such a raw yet real faith is the purest there is. Some nights, I wake to the screams of those no longer here, to Saran's echo, to Gemin's whisper, to Dylan's breath in the winter dawns, to Ain's laughter as he makes the women sing. And I think this camp is not just a refuge, it is a temple without walls, an altar made of wounds and embraces. And I, who once carried death in my backpack, now distribute soap and books. It doesn't seem like much, but in a broken world, it's more than enough. If anyone reads this, let them know that I'm not seeking to be a hero, a martyr, or a legend. I just want to be someone who chooses not to return fire with fire, but with tenderness. Someone who believed there was another way to resist, to sow. And if the world doesn't understand, it doesn't matter, because he does. The one who found me when there was only smoke. The one who wept for me before I even knew his name. The one who told me, without saying, "You are alive," and that is enough. And so, as night falls over the hills of Kurdistan and the stars flicker like memories, I settle down by the fireplace and reread that letter from Gemin. Jesus, if you find my sister, tell her to wait for me. Yes, Gemin. He found her, and one day, all of us who were found will find each other again. Without weapons, without fear, only with scars that shine, like beacons, like promises fulfilled. One of those nights when the cold seems to bite your ankles, I heard a soft song. It wasn't in Kurdish or Arabic. It was a language I didn't recognize, but the melody touched me. I followed the sound to a tent, where a young Ethiopian man was singing, his eyes closed. His voice was unassuming. When he finished, he looked at me and said, "It's a psalm. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me." I sat beside him. I said nothing. We just breathed together. Because there are times when faith is unspoken. It is shared like fire beneath the ashes. Over time, I came to understand that Jesus didn't just save me from hatred. He saved me from oblivion. Because when you're used as a weapon, the first thing you lose is your name. But somehow, as I walked through the rubble, as I shared bread, as I listened to the pain and hopes of others, something in me was restored. I don't know what tomorrow will bring, nor where the path will lead me. But I know I'm no longer the Baran I once was. And perhaps that's enough. Life sometimes reduces us to numbers, labels, missions. We are transformed into acronyms, statistics barely visible amidst the chaos. But in the gospel, I found something deeply moving. The story of Jesus calling a blind man by name, even when no one else could see him. And I thought, if he could look at that man lost in the crowd and call him by name, then he can also call me by mine, whenever I feel invisible. It was at that moment that a boy named Zania approached me, holding a dried flower between his fingers. "It's dead, Baran," he said, looking at the flower with a sad expression. I replied, "Yes, it's dead. But sometimes, what's dead can teach us more than what still lives." He looked at me with curious eyes and asked, "How so?" I smiled and said, "Flowers that no longer breathe remind us of what was beautiful, and that's what gives us the courage to plant again." With that, Zania ran to the dry ground and buried the flower, hoping for a miracle to happen. Of course, the flower didn't bloom, but every day he went there, looking at the earth as if hoping for life to return. And I, watching him, thought of the verse that says, "Unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains alone, but if it dies, it bears much fruit." Zaniar didn't know this, but his faith was exactly like that. A faith that buries what was broken, believing that something new can be born from it. One day, an elderly woman approached me. She asked me for a passage from the book, but with sadness in her eyes, she told me she couldn't read. "I want to hear words that will ease the pain in my back," she said. So I read to her Jesus' words from Matthew. "Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." When I finished, she let out a deep sigh. "This is what hurts me," she said softly. "Not my back, but my soul." She asked me to teach her a phrase she could repeat when the pain of memory was too much for her. I taught her, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." Now, whenever her knees tremble, she repeats those words. When she forgets, she sings. Because music, like a gentle balm, keeps the broken heart moving, reminding it that there is no giving up. One day, I stood in front of a makeshift mirror made from a rusty metal lid. I looked at my reflection, the eyes, the scars, the hair that no longer grows as it used to. Suddenly, I realized I didn't fully recognize myself, but at the same time I didn't reject myself. It was then that I remembered when Jesus said to Peter, "You are Simon, but you will be Peter." And I thought, sometimes we are no longer who we were, nor are we yet who we will be, but that doesn't diminish our value. God ultimately doesn't see us as something fixed, but as a process. If he could build the church on a man who denied him 3 times, then he can build something new in me too. That's when Jamil arrived at the camp. A young Afghan man with cracked lips and a broken accent. He had crossed mountains, lost his sister along the way, and despite his hunger, refused all food, accepting only water. After drinking, he looked at me with pained eyes and said, "I don't want to go on any longer. I'm tired of watching everything die before it blooms." I led him to the edge of a dry riverbank. I bent down, picked up a handful of dirt and said, "This looks dead too, but with the rain, it comes back to life." He looked at me angrily and asked, "What if the rain doesn't come?" I told him about Elijah, how he prayed for rain 7 times until a small cloud appeared on the horizon. Sometimes that's what faith is, I said, waiting, even when the sky is empty. Jamil said nothing, but the next day, he brought seeds from somewhere and planted them in the dry earth. He hoped that, like the earth, he too would flourish again. They come from places where eyes remain fixed, unblinking, as if each second were an eternity. Many don't speak. Others sleep with a knife under their pillow. But there's one who seeks me out every night. His name is Renaz. He lost his family in a bombing, and although he claims not to believe in God, whenever he sees me praying, he says he feels close, as if somehow he were there. I don't know how someone can speak to someone they can't see, but for some reason, it reminds me of the wind. I can't see it either, but I know exactly when it touches my face. Renaz doesn't pray yet, but the other day, he brought bread and broke it with his hands. Here, in this place, this act of sharing is the most sacred thing we can do. Sometimes, simple gestures have a power that words can never explain. One night, I dreamed of Son, walking through gray clouds. He said nothing, just looked at me. In the dream, I asked if he was okay, and he smiled, pointing to a tree covered in golden leaves. When I woke, I was confused, not understanding the meaning of the dream. But that afternoon, a girl came to me with a leaf painted in V2's colors and said, "This is your tree, the one that holds all the names that have not been forgotten." I said nothing, just hugged her. Somehow, I understood that God speaks in many ways, even through crayons. I remembered a passage in Isaiah that says, "Behold, I am doing a new thing. Will you not recognize it? I will make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert." And every day at this camp, I see it happen. Not in grand miracles, but in small resurrections. In mothers who laugh again, in children who learn to trust, in men who unleash their anger without yet knowing how to love, and in myself too. I am no longer that broken Baran, but a restored Baran. I am not perfect, but I am sustained, not by what I did, but by the one who found me among the ashes and chose to stay. That same week, I received a letter. There was no return address, just my name, written in smudged ink. At first, I thought it was a trap, something to trap those who still harbored some compassion, but upon opening it, I recognized the handwriting. It was from Kawa, an old comrade in arms, someone I had fought side by side with in another life. He had died for me, I thought, but he was alive, or at least he was being held in a military penitentiary north of Mosul. The letter said just one line, "Baran, if there's still room for someone like me, tell me where to find him." My hands trembled. I remembered that it was Kawa who detonated the explosive that killed 3 civilians, believing them to be spies. At the time, I didn't defend him, and I don't justify him now. But in that letter, I saw something, a silent plea for redemption. I didn't write a sermon. I didn't quote verses. I didn't make promises. I simply responded with the words Paul wrote to the Romans, "Where sin abounded, grace did much more abound." And I said to him, "Kawa, if you breathe, there is still room. And if you come, don't look for temples. Come where we share bread." I still don't know if that letter arrived, but since I wrote it, I've been sleeping more lightly. Something in me has changed. One night, I woke to a soft cry, the kind of cry that tries to stay muffled. It was Aram, the former tattoo activist. He was sitting alone in the corner where we keep the firewood, his head bowed. "Does anything hurt?" I asked, my voice low, feeling the fragility of each word. He shook his head, but his gaze was distant, as if he were still lost somewhere where the pain never ceases. As I approached, I saw that he was holding a page torn from an old Bible. I didn't know where it had come from, but the page was marked, as if he were afraid to touch it, afraid to tear it by mistake. He showed me the page, and there, in shaky letters, was John 3:17. "For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved." "It's true, Baran," he said, his voice soft, like that of a lost child, as if he'd found something he'd been searching for so long without knowing it. "Yes, Aram didn't come to condemn us. He came to find us, even when no one else would." He nodded, as if the sentence were enough, and then fell silent. The next day, I saw him washing the feet of a sick old man without a single word, just a gesture, as if you already knew that sometimes actions speak louder than any sermon. A few weeks ago, the camp's generator broke down. Darkness descended like a blanket, enveloping the entire place. Children cried, mothers tried to comfort them, but sadness hung in the air like a thick cloud. I went to the center, where the tallest pole stood, and lit a gas lantern. I held it like a beacon in the midst of the raging sea. Slowly, people emerged from their tents. No one said a word. They approached the light like moths, drawn to a flame, searching for some hope. At that moment, I remembered Jesus' words, "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." We didn't fix the generator that night, but something in those broken souls began to heal. Sometimes that's what we need. Not a solution, but a light, however small, to pierce the darkness. The next morning, a mother came to me with her son in her arms. He had a high fever, his lips cracked and dry. There was no more medicine. She wept. "I can't lose another one," she said with a pain I knew well. She had already buried her husband and daughter in less than a month. I knelt, placed my hand on the boy's forehead, and prayed. I didn't use pretty words, or ones that sounded strong. I simply said, "Jesus, don't ask me for too much faith. Just don't go away." By the time the sun came up, the fever had broken. Now, I know many will say it was just the child's body fighting the fever, but inside me, I felt something else. I felt as if heaven had descended, not to change the laws of physics, but to hold a mother who could no longer hold anything. That night, with the silence of the camp in the background, I remembered the stones, those who never returned, those whose names were lost in war, in pain, in fear. Many write their names on the stones and leave them near the fire as a final testimony. I also left a stone. I wrote Baran, but crossed it out, and below it, I wrote another name, Ebed of Yahweh, servant of the Lord. Because I understood in that moment, my story does not end with a broken name, but with a new one, engraved on my heart, as it is written in Revelation 2:17. "And I will give him a white stone, and on it will be written a new name that no one knows except the one who receives it." I'm not the same anymore. And though this new name is never spoken aloud, it sustains me in ways I can't explain. One morning, while we were distributing bread, I saw Samira faint. She, who cared for the orphans, gave everything she had, and then some. I barely ate so I could share with the children. We took her inside, gave her water, and as she recovered, she held my hand with silent strength. "Do you know what hurts me most?" she asked me, her eyes heavy with exhaustion and resignation. "It's not my body, but the fact that no one tells me it's worth carrying on." It was as if, upon hearing this, something inside me broke too. I looked at her and instead of empty consolation, responded with the words Jesus spoke to a woman condemned to death. "Neither do I condemn thee. Go and sin no more." But then I whispered something else to her, something I knew she needed to hear. "You are the king's daughter." At first, she didn't understand, but the next day, she combed her hair, put on a clean robe and smiled. And I knew in that moment that those 3 words had done more for her than all the food in the world. In this place, miracles are not always visible. Sometimes they are heard, as when a stuttering child recites a verse without stuttering. They are not found in grand gestures, but in small signs of healing, in simple words that touch the heart. Or when a man who only knew how to scream suddenly finds the words to whisper a prayer. Or when someone who had never touched a face with affection finally caresses a cheek for the first time. And you realize that the kingdom has already arrived, not because it is visible, but because it is present in the gentle wind, in the voice that calls us, in the cross that marks us. What if I leave tomorrow? Or what if those who still seek me angrily find me? I don't want to be remembered as a martyr, nor as a deserter, only as someone who, amidst the shrapnel and dust, knew how to hear the echo of a phrase that said hope is never lost. Even in silence, I cried for you too. Because, in the end, it wasn't me who did something great. It was he who made himself small to reach me. And that's enough. One afternoon, a young man came up to me. He couldn't have been more than 16. He wore a black scarf over his face and carried an old backpack over his shoulder. He looked at me with the look of someone who wants to ask for something but doesn't know how to say it. "Do you have food here?" he asked. I nodded and offered him bread, but he refused. "That's not why I came. I came because I heard you have something that keeps others from breaking." I was silent. I didn't know what to say. If he knew how broken I was, he wouldn't ask me for anything, but he persisted. "Is it true that you talk to God, even without seeing him?" I thought for a moment, and instead of answering, I asked, "Do you talk to the wind when you're alone?" "Yes, sometimes," he replied, lowering his voice. "Then you know how it's done," I said. I put my hand on his shoulder, and together we prayed. I don't know what words I said. I don't think I said any. We stood there, silent, facing each other. When he opened his eyes, they were filled with tears. He spoke, almost in a whisper. "It's like when you come home, but there's no home. What you feel is him." The boy returned the next day, and the next, and the next. Today, he teaches the little ones to read. He still uses the scarf, but no longer to hide. Now, he carries it on his arm, as a symbol that his story is not buried. It is being written. One night, I dreamed I was lost in the middle of the sea. There was no moon, no shore, just endless, liquid darkness. In the dream, I cried out, "Where are you?" And a voice answered, "I am in the hollow of your empty hands." I woke up with tears in my eyes. I realized I didn't need to fill each day with certainties. I just needed to keep my hands open, because empty hands are an altar. Here in this place where hope is almost a smuggled commodity, the altars are not made of marble. They are marks, impressions left by life. An old man told me he was a blacksmith. "We forged spears," he said, "until the day I got tired of seeing so many blood-stained spears." He showed me one he still kept. It was no longer a weapon. He had bent it into the shape of a cross, so that iron may also have redemption, he said. I hung this cross on the door of the shelter, not to ward off death, but to remind us that love doesn't have to be strong. It just has to endure. And it is. Sometimes people ask me, why am I still here? Why don't I run away while I can? And the answer didn't come in a sermon, nor in the pages of a book. The answer is in the eyes of the young man who now teaches others to read. It's in the folded cross that, from a weapon, was made into a reminder of love. The answer is in every open hand, in every whispered prayer, in every simple act of those who decide not to run away but to stay. I found hope in the eyes of a girl who showed me a drawing. It was a sun with tears. "Why does the sun cry?" I asked. She replied, "Because it sees everything, but it still shines." And then I thought, this is how I want to live. Seeing everything, the ugly, the hard, the unfair, but still shining. And if you're also at war, even if no one knows. If you carry an invisible backpack full of heavy memories, if you're tired of praying and feeling like God doesn't answer, don't leave. Stay. Not because I have answers, but because here, among the ruins, we learn something that the noise of the world doesn't let us hear. Sometimes, those who are silent aren't silent because they have nothing to say, but because they're crying with you. And that, too, is an answer. In the early morning, before the roosters crowed, I was awakened by a murmur. It sounded like someone whispering low, almost imperceptible words. I followed the sound to the tent of Ahmed, a man who never spoke, always absent, his eyes lost in a past no one dared name. He sat there with a lit candle and a crumpled piece of paper in his hands. He didn't say anything, and I didn't ask. He kept mumbling, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." I didn't need to ask why. Sometimes you don't need to see the wound to feel the pain. I just sat beside him and wordlessly wept too, there, in the silence, without names, with only the presence of one who can heal what time has destroyed. Something inside him broke. It wasn't enough to break the chains that bound him, but there was a lightness in the air. Since that day, Ahmed hasn't spoken much, but when he greets someone, his now clear eyes speak louder than any sermon. A little girl once asked me, "What does God sound like?" I could have answered with verses or theories, but I remembered a hug I received when I was on the verge of giving up. So, with a smile, I said, "It sounds like a hug that comes at just the right time." She smiled back and hugged me back. And in that hug, I heard God. Sometimes I think all of this, all this pain, this waiting, this war, is just a long whisper from God, beginning at the beginning of the world. Amidst the bombs, betrayals, and despair, He still speaks. Not with thunder, but with small gestures, like when someone offers their last piece of bread, or when someone who can't read memorizes a verse just because it's good for their heart. We are surrounded by invisible altars, and every tear that doesn't fall on its own, every gesture of compassion, is a silent prayer. The other day I found myself writing names in an old notebook, not the names of the fallen, but of those who endured, those who carry on, those who love, even when love hurts. And as I wrote, I realized that the names formed a prayer that said, "We are those who believe that even in the midst of destruction, peace can flourish." And I started to cry because, in that moment, I understood. I'm not alone. I never have been. We are an army, but without rifles, with faith. And this faith doesn't need applause or victories. It just needs someone to hold its hand when it wavers. One day, if I leave here, I want to go to a place where no one knows my story, where I can plant a tree and watch it grow without having to remember the bombs that fell, where hope needs no justification, only deep roots that hold firm in the soil, unafraid of the storm. But if that never happens, if this land remains my desert, then I will stay just the same. Because I have learned that even deserts can bloom, that dry valleys can also echo with psalms, and that those who sow in tears will one day reap songs. And if you are reading these words on a dark night, in a cold bed, amidst chaos, know that this is for you. You are not alone. Even if the world screams that all is lost, there is still someone who calls you by your name, not the name given at birth, but the one written in the heart of those who love you, with fire and tenderness. That name cannot be erased, not even by death. And if that name resists oblivion, so can you, because you are not a number, not a statistic, not just another case. You are a verse in the wind, a story that hasn't yet reached its end, a seed that, even crushed, refuses to yield to death. I once saw a woman in the rain, picking up pieces of wet bread from the ground. She carefully arranged them in a torn bag. I asked her why she did that. "Because someone will go hungry tomorrow," she told me. This phrase was engraved in my soul. Not for the bread, but for this tomorrow. Only those who believe in tomorrow take the time to care for today, even if it hurts, even if it's difficult. Sometimes, I feel like giving up too. Yes, that happens to me too. When I see the children playing among the rubble, my heart breaks. I wonder what kind of world we're leaving them. But then I see them laughing. A laugh soiled with dirt, but cleansed with hate. And it makes me want to try again, because if they're still laughing, then I can still have hope. Faith isn't a safe haven. It's a trench open to the sky. It's not a certainty, it's a heartbeat, and it doesn't always ring loud. Sometimes you can barely hear, but when there's nothing left, it's all there is. A young man once told me he lost his faith. He could no longer pray, and when he tried, he only heard silence. I told him that silence is also prayer. That there are cries that only God understands when they cannot be expressed in words. Even when you can't speak to him, he never stopped listening. Recently, I found a crumpled piece of paper in the pocket of an old coat. It was a verse, just one, written in shaky handwriting. I will heal their infidelity. I will love them with pure grace. It didn't say who wrote it, but it wasn't necessary, because it was for me, for you, for anyone who has ever felt like they've failed God and feel like they don't deserve to return. He always leaves the door ajar. Today, I saw a dry branch with a bud, a single leaf, tiny, shy, but alive. I looked at it as if it were a miracle, because it was. We are like that, like dry branches. But if there is a spark of wisdom, if there is a living promise, it will sprout, even if it is late, even if no one expects it, even if winter lasts longer than the soul can bear. And if tonight you feel like you can't take it anymore, if fear grips your throat and whispers that it's all over, stay, take a deep breath, and remember that there's still someone praying for you, even if you don't know their name. Someone who believes in you, even when you can no longer believe. Someone who keeps a candle lit, waiting for your return. Because it's not about strength. It's about not giving up. And I won't let you go. Have you ever stopped to think about the power of the invisible? On one occasion, Jesus was facing a crowd with people shouting, pointing, and judging. And what did he do? He didn't raise his voice, didn't try to argue, just crouched down and wrote in the sand. He made no noise, but with that simple gesture, he changed someone's life forever. Sometimes the quietest things, those that seem insignificant to the world's eyes, are the ones that carry the greatest power. What many despise, God uses to reveal his salvation. If you ever feel so lost, so scarred by pain, that you can't even forgive yourself, remember this. Even sand, touched by a son of God, can become an altar. And somehow this story, even though it's long, fragmented, and full of wounds, has hidden pieces of heaven. And as long as the sun shines, as long as tears fall upon us, as long as there are arms reaching out and crosses raised, it will still make sense, because God's goodness doesn't depend on circumstances, and even in the midst of suffering, he remains good. And that's enough to keep going, to sow, to hope, because if we sow in tears, we will reap songs. I know this. Today dawned cloudy. The skies seemed uncertain, as if the world wasn't ready to wake up. I went to the camp's well, where some women were collecting water, a heavy silence in the air. One of them, her hands so chapped from the cold, looked at the ground and said to me without much fanfare, I dreamed of a large table, full of bread, and in that dream, no one was fighting over who would get what. And you were there? I asked, surprised. Was I there? She replied with the same calmness. Yes, but I knew the table was mine too. She walked away with the full bucket, but those words stayed with me. Because somehow, borrowed dreams sometimes sustain us more than our own. There are times when my faith seems to slip through my fingers, like water we can't hold. But then I remember the woman who, silently, touched Jesus' cloak. She didn't ask permission. She didn't make a grand ceremony. She simply reached out, her heart in despair. And Jesus didn't reject her. He called her his daughter. And that's enough for me. I don't need to be called a saint. I don't need to be understood, or to have the right words. What I want most is to be called a daughter, the daughter of a father who doesn't fear my scars, who knelt on the earth to raise up those the world has forgotten. Yesterday, I saw some children playing with empty bottles. They turned them into soldiers, castles, dragons. One of the boys said, "My warrior has an invisible shield, but he resists everything." The other replied, "Like you, who are always here." I froze. There, among those empty bottles, God was speaking to me. An invisible shield, a silent faithfulness, a constant presence, even when everything seems broken. The other day, we buried a nameless man. No one knew where he came from. The only thing we knew was that he had given his last blanket to another man who was colder. As we covered him with earth, someone whispered, "Maybe he was never famous, but in heaven they must have shouted his name." And in that moment I realized something profound. True greatness makes no noise. Eternity rewards not grandiose speeches, but small acts of kindness. Heaven is not filled with war heroes, but with artisans of good. It is filled with people who loved in silence, who didn't run away when hard times arose, who gave without expecting anything in return. One afternoon, I was reading Psalm 23 with a man who had lost everything. When we got to the part that says, "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil," he interrupted me. "That's not a promise to avoid the valley," he said. "It's a promise of companionship." And that's when I learned a powerful lesson. Often, what's most healing isn't getting out of the valley, but knowing we're not in it alone. If you, reading this, have tired eyes and a wounded soul, I want you to know something very important. God doesn't need you to be strong to draw near to Him. You don't need to stand up for Him to look at you. He comes down to where you are. He doesn't wait at the top of the mountain. He goes to the bottom of the pit. He sits in the mud and gets His hands dirty for you. Because that's what true love is. It doesn't fear what's broken. It doesn't run from the darkness, but embraces it until dawn. One night, while everyone was resting, someone left a flower at the foot of the iron cross at the shelter's entrance. A fragile, small flower, but it managed to survive the night. When the sun rose, it shone as if it had conquered winter. At that moment, something inside me ignited, and I thought, this is what we are. Flowers that bloom amidst the ruins, songs that echo in the trenches, empty hands that become altars. And honestly, if that's not a miracle, I don't know what is. And then, amidst the dust, amidst the chaos and sound surrounding us, someone began to sing. It wasn't a beautiful song, nor a familiar melody, but a simple murmur, almost like a broken prayer. But there was something in their voice that made us stop everything. We stopped talking, eating, thinking, because in that voice was such pure truth, a truth that needs no harmony to shake the soul. She was a woman who had lost her 3 children in separate bombings, a woman who no longer had tears, but who still had her voice. And with that voice, she said more than any sermon could, "I still believe, even if I don't understand anything." And it was at that moment that I realized something I've never forgotten. Faith isn't about seeing, it's about continuing to sing when the echo of our voice doesn't respond. Faith is raising our voice, not to demand answers, but to lean on the invisible, on what cannot be seen, but which sustains. Later, a young man showed me a crumpled photo. It was him and his mother in front of a tent, with a blue sky in the background. I asked, "Do you miss her?" He was silent, but then said, "I honor her." "How?" I asked. He calmly replied, "Every time I share something, every time I help someone, every time I choose not to hate." I remained silent, because I knew this was living faith. A faith that doesn't hide in temples, that doesn't disguise itself with applause. A faith that is more than words, more than appearance. A faith that can be seen in the hands, that touches, that washes, that elevates. I remembered something an old pastor told me. Before every sermon, I ask God for 3 things: that I never forget where He brought me from, that I never grow accustomed to His grace, and that I never steal His glory. And every night, even when I'm not preaching, I repeat that prayer. Because we all preach in some way, with what we do when no one is looking, with what we choose when we're broken, with what we keep silent so as not to hurt another. You also preach with the way you move on, with the way you forgive when you have reason to hate, with the way you stay when everyone around you decides to leave. One morning, I approached a man who was carving wood with a knife. Curious, I asked, "What are you doing?" He looked at me with a distant look, as if he were somewhere else, and replied, "What for?" I, unsure of what to say, continued to stare, and then he added, "I'm doing this to put on my son's grave." I remained silent. No words could ease that weight. He looked me in the eye and, with a calm that was almost broken, said, "I know God won't bring you back, but if I can carve something that says so, I'll wait for you." And it was there, amidst a simple piece of wood, that I realized that pain never wins. Love never gives up, not even in the grave. I left there crying, not out of pity, but because I understood that there is something stronger than death, and it is love that endures. One afternoon, while cleaning up the remains of a fire, someone found a Bible. The edges were burned, but one page was still intact, and on that page were written the words, "Those who wait on the Lord will renew their strength." It was as if, among the ashes, that word had been preserved, like a promise that nothing can consume. We took the book to the center of the camp and placed it on a wooden table. No one touched it. We stood there, just staring, because it wasn't just any book. It was a living testament that even amidst the ashes, God's promise remains firm. And if today you feel like those ashes, if the struggle to rise seems overwhelming, if all seems lost, listen to what I have to say. There is a God who still writes above the smoke, who still brings beauty to what the world calls destruction. God doesn't need you to be strong, wise, or perfect. He just needs you not to walk away, to make a small space for him, even if it's fearful, even if it's uncertain. He enters where no one else enters, not to judge you, but to welcome you, because you are not the sum of your mistakes or failures. You are God's dream clothed in flesh and blood. You are the reason he stretched out his arms on the cross. You are the yes he never tires of repeating. So, if tonight you find yourself lost, not knowing what to do, stop for a moment and place your hand on your chest. I felt this heartbeat. It's not a coincidence. This beat is a divine signature. It's God's going in your life. And as long as your heart beats, there's still a plan. And as long as there's a plan, you still have time. Now that we've come this far, with dirty hands and a mended soul, with heavy but still open eyes, I want to tell you this with a certainty that is not human, but with the unbreakable confidence of someone who has learned not to rely on themselves, but on the one who never wavered. You are not alone. You were not alone, and you never will be. Everything you've experienced, even the things you don't understand, even the things that broke you and made you think it was the end, were part of a journey where God was your companion, even when you didn't realize it. He is not offended by your questions. He does not shy away from your doubts. He does not tire of your tears and will never be disappointed by your wounds. He enters, stays, and transforms. Because as his word says, even though my father and my mother forsake me, the Lord will take me up. Psalm 27:10. So, everything will be okay. Not because everything will be resolved tomorrow, but because God isn't finished with you. He still has chapters to write, songs to sing, people to hug, and miracles you haven't seen yet. Close your eyes, and yes, you'll be tired, but don't close your heart, because even in the deepest silence, he continues to whisper your name. That name that will never be erased. That name written on the palm of his hand. That name for which Jesus went to the end and never turned back. And if, by chance, you doubt again, if fear overwhelms you again, if the weight of the world presses against your chest and makes you tremble, read this again, calmly. Take a deep breath, and remember, those who sow in tears, even in the most barren fields, will reap joy. It is not I who promise this. It is he who never fails, who never lies, and whose word never returns void. He promises you, I promise you. And even if you can't see the way now, even if the pain still seems greater than the hope, have the courage to believe. Because in the end, the harvest will come. And it will be a harvest of peace, healing, and strength to carry on, no matter what. He is with you every step of the way, and his promise will be fulfilled. I know it will. And if doubt returns, breathe and remember, he never gives up on those who sow, especially when it's with tears. You are not alone.